So begin today the Gemara on Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis, 5 lines up from the bottom of the Yamud where it says Shloisha Lekuchais. The Gemara here continues discussing details in the halacha of a chazakah. When a person is in a property for 3 years or more, and then he has a presumptive status that he is the owner of this property. It says the Gemara Shloisha Lekuchais Mitztarfin. If you have 3 people that are in a property together 3 years. So you had one person, and then he sold it to someone else, and the second person sold it to a third person, and together they were in this property for 3 years. So it combines together, these 3 years combines together to be a chazakah, even though each one individually was not there 3 years. But now someone else, that was the previous owner, that comes and claims, what are you doing here? You're on my property. While there was another 3 people that were there for 3 years, that combines together as a chazakah that they have the presumptive status of ownership. Amar Rav, so Rav explained about this, V'kulam b'shtar. And all of them, it's only if they bought the property with a shtar. In a case when the buyer bought it with a shtar, it's written with a document, that there's witnesses that sign it, so then that owner that's now saying, that I saw one person was machzik for a year, another one for another year, another one for a third year. I didn't think there's a reason for me to be meicha, that I should protest against this, because you left after a year and someone else came, and then someone else came. That's if it was no shtar. So he can claim that he thought that these 3 people have nothing to do with each other, and he didn't hear that they bought it from the person before. But if it's with a shtar, and there's Adam that signed the shtar, and people know about this, so there's a kail, so then the person should have been meicha, realizing that this chazakah is really all one chazakah, that one is selling to the next. Frag the Gemara, so Rav says specifically it has to be with a shtar. Lememre, shall we say this means the Savar Rav, that Rav's opinion is shtar isle kala, that if the sale was with a document, that creates a rumor, and therefore the one that now claims it's his should have been meicha. Ve'edim leslu kala. But if one sold to the other and it was just sold in the presence of Edim, but it wasn't documented, so that's something where there's not enough of a rumor about this, and therefore he could claim, I didn't understand that one is buying from the other, and that's why I wasn't meicha. But Rav said, ha-meicha sadeh be'edim. A person that sold a property with Edim, and he sells this property taking responsibility that if anything gets confiscated from you, if it gets taken away from you, then you're going to be reimbursed. You'll be reimbursed. Took responsibility for the sale, and the whole sale was just with Edim. So if this property that he just sold actually got confiscated from the buyer, so then he can go to the seller and get reimbursed, and he can get reimbursed not only from the seller himself, but he can get reimbursed from any property that this seller now sold to someone else afterwards. And he can come to that second buyer and say, you bought a property that's really meshubah to me because it was confiscated from me, that what I bought before was confiscated from me, and I'm getting reimbursed from my seller, and he sold to you after me, so I can come to you and get reimbursed. So what this means is that the second buyer should know that there's a shibud here to the first buyer, and therefore you can get compensated by that. And that's without any shtar. The one that bought the property first, there was no shtar here, it was just with Edim. So we see here that Rav says that when you sell a property just with Edim, the second buyer should be aware of this. He should realize that there's a previous buyer that may later come to get compensated from him. That's why you can go and collect from him. So why is Rav saying here regarding a chazakah that only if there's a shtar do we say that the Marakama knows about this, and only then does he have to be meicha? That's the Gemara. It's not the same thing. Hasam lekucha is there when it comes to buyers, a person that's buying a property. Inu afsidu anafshayu. He is bringing this loss upon himself. What this means is when you're a buyer, you're spending money and you're buying a property, you're buying a house, so you have to do your due diligence. You have to go and make your own research to find out what's going on with this seller. Is this seller have loans and money that he owes to other people, and therefore a previous house that he sold or a previous property that he sold may be confiscated, and then they're going to come back to me? That's the buyer has to make that kind of investigation. So even in a case where there's previous business or previous things that he sold that were not with a shtar, and now so it got confiscated, the fact that they're coming back to you, you could have expected that to happen. You should have made that kind of investigation even without a shtar. But over here though, when it comes to a person that has to be meicha, regarding people that are occupying his property. So over here, we don't say that. Over here, when you see one person that's occupying his property and he leaves, and then someone else is, and a third person is, so he doesn't realize that these people are connected. So in such a case, he could come and give an excuse that there wasn't enough of a reason for me to be moichel because I didn't see one person being machzik for 3 years straight. But now the Gemara asks another question on this. Umi yomar Rav hachi. Did Rav say this halacha regarding a sale that even if it's a sale just with Eidim, without a shtar, it's enough, Eidim is enough of a reason that there'll be a rumor about this, a kail about this, that you can then come and collect for this property that got confiscated from this buyer from the Chasam Mishabadim. But Vatnan, we learned in a Mishnah regarding a case of a loan. This is a Mishnah in the end of this Masechta. Hamalves chaveri b'shtar. If you lend money and it's in a shtar, the loan is written in a document, so then the lender can come and collect from the borrower, not just from properties that he has in his possession, but even from properties that he sold to someone else. Because if it's in a shtar, so then the buyers of this property should know about this loan that was in a shtar, and therefore even after they bought it, it could be confiscated from them. But if you just borrowed money with Eidim and it's not written in a shtar, you only have the right to collect from any properties that the borrower has in his possession, not from any buyers. Why? Because if this is not a loan that's documented, those buyers can say, we didn't know about that loan, and it's not part of our responsibility to investigate and know about this. So if we bought this property, it's not right that it should now be confiscated from us for the payment of that loan. So here you see clearly that the Mishnah is saying that there is a difference between a milva and the shtar, a milva that's just with eidos, regarding whether the buyer knows about this loan or not. And before, Rav said regarding when you have one buyer and then you have a second buyer, that the second buyer should be aware about the first person that bought the property, even if it was just with Eidim, without a shtar, that it's the second buyer's responsibility to make that investigation and find out about the first buyer. And then if that property of the first buyer will be confiscated, the second buyer will have to lose his property to reimburse him. So what's the story? Just with Eidim, is it something that it's your responsibility to find out about or not? So the Gemara says, if you'll argue and say, Rav, Tanahu Polik. Maybe Rav argues on this Mishnah. Sometimes we say that because Rav wasn't that generation, he was a Talmud of Rebbe, and sometimes Rav can say things that argue with the Mishnah. So in this case, Rav argues with the halach of the Mishnah. But we know that this is not true because V'harav Shmuel Damri Tarvayu. Both Rav and Shmuel said, Milval pe eina goyve loy min hayorshin v'loy min kuchais. That any loan that was just by mouth, meaning it's not documented, you have it with Eidim, but not documented, you can't collect from any of the inheritors of this borrower, and you can't collect from the lukuchais from any buyer either. So we see that Rav holds of this halacha that if it's not documented, you can't collect from any buyers. And the Yamis's Drishayim here explain the basis of this halacha that you can't collect from inheritors or from buyers is because a shibud of a loan, minatayre, it doesn't go over to a buyer or to an inheritor. Only the borrower himself is responsible to pay for a loan. Right? But midrabanan, regarding a buyer, there's a takana that you could collect from a buyer. Because if not, then no one's going to want to ever lend anybody money. Because you're afraid that the borrower is just going to sell off his assets and then he won't have anything to pay you. So midrabanan, you can collect from a buyer. But when is that? Only if there's a shtar. And then there's a koil. So then you can turn to the buyer and say, listen, there was a shtar about this loan. When you bought the property, you should have known that it may be confiscated from you for this loan. But if it's al peh and there's no koil about this, so then the buyer buys it, then it's not right then that we should come and take it away from him. So we clearly see here that Rav holds that if there's no shtar, you can't confiscate from a buyer. And before we said that Rav says that you could confiscate from a second buyer to reimburse the first buyer, even without a shtar. Answers the Gemara, it's not a question. Milva azvini karamis. You're asking a question regarding a loan without a shtar. On the case that Rav was speaking about, when there was a first buyer and then a second buyer, it's not the same thing. Milva, when it comes to a loan, the nature of a loan is kika yosef betzina yosef. A person that is forced to borrow money, he tries to borrow money and he keeps it quiet. Why does he want to keep the fact that he's borrowing money quiet? So that his assets should not lose value. If people see that this person is very pressed for money, and now he's selling his assets, and they know that he had to borrow money beforehand, so then they're going to see how desperate he is, so the value of his properties are going to go down. So when a person borrows, he makes an effort that it should be quiet, the fact that he's borrowing money. So therefore, by a loan, we say, only when it's written in a shtar, then the rumor about this goes out. But as long as there's no shtar, even just with Eidim, it remains quiet. So in such a case, you can't then go and confiscate from a buyer regarding a loan. But Zvimi, when it comes to a sale, man de zoven ara, a person that sells a property, b'ferhesia zoven. He's selling it publicly. He's looking for buyers. So he lets everyone know that he's selling a property. Should be avoided. Everybody should know about this. So therefore, when it comes to a sale, here's where Rav said that even without a shtar, even just a sale with Eidim, it's something that's enough known to everybody that a second buyer should have known about the first sale that he made, that there's a first buyer here, and therefore he should be careful when he's buying his property to find out whether he may have to reimburse the first buyer for this. Tana Rabbanon and a Braisa we learned. Ochla ha'av shana. If a person, a father, is using and occupying a property for a year, and then va'ben shtayim, and the father died, and now the son is there in this property for 2 years. Or the opposite, ha'av shtayim, the father was in the property for 2 years, va'ben shana, and the son was there for a year. Or another case, ha'av shana, the father was there in the property for a year, va'ben shana, the son was there for another year, va'lekeach shana, and then the son sells it to someone, and the buyer is there for a year. So together you have 3 years here. Harei zu chazakah. This is a valid chazakah, and even though it's different people that are using the property, but you can see how it's the father and then the son that got it from the father, and then the buyer as well. So there's a connection here between them, and the Marakama has the obligation to be meiche if he claims that he never sold it, so he has to be meiche in such a case. Says the Gemara, lemeimre, shall we say, the lekeyach is lekola, that when you have a buyer, so there's a koil about this, and therefore you have to be meiche against this. So the Gemara asks here a stira from what it says in the Braisa. Now the Rashbam points out that really the question the Gemara is going to ask here from this Braisa is also a question on what we already said before. Before already, Rav said when you have 3 people, one bought from the other, that it's going to be considered a chazakah. So over here, this case is basically saying the same point regarding a buyer as well. So the stira is v'ramini in the Braisa it says as follows: Ochla b'fnei ha'av. A person that occupied the property for 3 years. One person is using the property for 3 years. But now, who is the owner from before? There was a father that owned it before. So that father was alive for the first year that you're occupying this property. Then ubifnei ben shtayim. Then that person dies, and now you continue occupying his property for another 2 years in front of the son. Or the opposite, b'fnei ha'av shtayim, in front of the father for 2 years, b'fnei ha'ben shana, then the father dies and in front of the son for 2 years. Or b'fnei ha'av shana, you're occupying this property in front of the father for a year, and b'fnei ha'ben shana, in front of the son for another year, and then b'fnei lekeach shana. And then this son sold the property to someone else, but while the son sells it to someone else, you're continuing and occupying this property, and together you're there for 3 years. So even though the owner that you're using the property from him, it's not the same person. There's a father, there's a son, and there's even a buyer then that the son sells it to. Harei zu chazakah. It's a good chazakah. And so that you have a raya that you must have bought it from them before. They owned it before, but you bought it from them, and that's why you're here for 3 years. But now the question is, what's going on over here? The last case of this brisa was that the son sold it to someone. While you are occupying this property, he goes ahead and sells it. There's a lekeach here. If you're going to say that when there's a lekech, when there's a buyer of a property, so everybody knows about this, there's no greater protest against you occupying this property than this. Why does he have to protest against you when you're occupying his property? While you're there, this previous owner is selling it to someone else. You claim he sold it to you. But now, after the 2nd year of you being there, he went and sold it to someone else. That's the greatest macha. He's making a point that it's not yours. He's selling it to someone else. So from this itself, you see, it must be that when you sell it to someone, there's no koil about this. And therefore, the one that's making the chazakah could say, I didn't know about the fact that he sold it to someone else. I didn't realize that he was meiche. He has to make a proper macha to protest against me, to talk to me, to come me. The fact that he sold it to someone else, I didn't know about this. So from here is a raya that when someone buys something, there's no koil about this. And says the Gemara, in that brisa when it says that there's a person that he sold it to, That's a case where this son, there's a father here, then the son, and then the son sold this property to someone. He didn't just sell this property. He sold a bunch of his properties, stam, to a certain buyer. So in such a case, the one that's being machzik in the karka can say that when I heard that he sold his properties b'chlal, I didn't think that includes this property. I didn't consider it to be a macha against me. I thought it obviously is not including this property, because this property he sold to me, and the shtar that I have, I already lost. So I didn't consider that to be a macha. But in a case where he just sold this property to someone else, there is a koil about that, and obviously that's going to be just as good as any macha, and even better than any macha, by the fact that this owner is selling it to someone else. He's making the biggest point that it doesn't belong to you that is occupying the property. The Mishnah gives a list of different kinds of people that cannot establish a chazakah. Ha'umnin, a craftsman. So actually, this case of the craftsman is not necessarily talking about the chazakah of karka, which takes 3 years to establish. This is even beneged to metaltalin. Let's say, for example, you have a tailor or cleaners that has a garment, and usually by metaltalin, just by the possession of metaltalin, of any movable items in your hands or in your house, that itself is proof that it's yours. There's a chazak, the Gemara says, Kol ma shetachas yad adam shalohu. If something is in your possession, we assume that it's yours. But if it's a cleaner or a tailor, anyone similar to that has something in his possession, he can't come and claim the fact that I have it is proof that it's mine. Because now we know that it's the derech that he is doing a job for somebody. That's why he has it in his possession. So it's no proof at all. Va'ashutvin, or partners. This is talking about a karka, when you have two people that bought a piece of land in partnership, and now one shutuf is using the other part of this karka, and he used it for 3 years. That's not going to be a chazaka by shutvin. For ha'arisin, or if you have a sharecropper that's working in a field and he gets a certain percent from the crop. So if he's there and occupying the place and eating it all for himself for 3 years, it's also not a raya that it says. V'ha'petrupin, or a person that's a caretaker for Yisaimim, and he works there in the field and he's there for 3 years, and afterwards he comes and says it was sold to me. Eilem chazaka. Since these are all people that it's their derech to be there anyways all the time, so the fact that we're there for 3 years does not prove that it's theirs. Another thing, loy leish chazaka b'nichsei ishtoi. A husband cannot establish a chazakah in the properties of his wife. This is speaking about nichsei melug, which the properties itself belong to her, but the paytis of it, the fruits of it, belongs to the husband. So therefore, it's the derech of the husband to work there in the field all the time. So the fact that he's there and now he claims that his wife sold it completely to him, there's no proof for this. And v'loy leisha chazakah b'nichsei baila, or if a wife is occupying her husband's properties for 3 years, it's also no proof that he sold it to her, because the husband has the obligation to feed his wife. So she's there using and eating from the fruits of the property. A father can't establish a chazakah in the property of his son, and or the son in the property of the father either. This is all beniged to the halacha of cheskas gimel shanim, to create a status of ownership by being there for 3 years. Says the Mishnah, this is all regarding the halacha of chazakah of 3 years that serves as a proof that you bought it. Aval, however, there's a different concept of chazakah. There's the concept of chazakah where a person is not trying to prove anything. The chazakah where there's a certain action that you do in the property that creates a kinyan. So if someone's giving you a gift, or brothers that are dividing inheritance, or if there's a ger that dies and there are no yoshim, and you want to buy it and you want to do an action that will create the kinyan. So then there's a different concept. This is called kinyan chazakah, not the proof of chazakah. So regarding kinyan chazakah, it doesn't matter. In all these cases, you can make the kinyan chazakah. Noal, if you lock the door, or for godar, you put up a fence in the area where there was no fence, or a paratz, you break open a fence in the area where there was. So you do some work, some change in the property. Kolshu, even in a little bit, harez l'chazakah. That's the act of the kinyan of chazakah in the property. Okay, so the Gemara, Avua, the Shmuel, the Levi. The father of Shmuel, and also Levi, which was his friend. So Tanu, they learned in the Mishnah that shutef ein l'chazakah, that by partners that own a property together, there's no chazakah. And v'kol shekain uman. If by partners there's no chazakah, so then needless to say, regarding a uman, regarding a craftsman, that there's no chazakah, and you don't even have to be guided in the Mishnah Ummah. If when it comes to partners, now partners, one person owns one half, another person owns another half. There would be a certain svara to say, maybe one could establish a chazakah on the other, if he's then machzik on his friend's half. And if we're going to say regarding a shutuf that there's no chazakah, then it's obvious that by a uman, a craftsman, a tailor has someone's garments, for sure he can't establish chazakah by it being in his possession. However, Shmuel, Tani Uman Ein Le Chazakah, Shmuel was guided in our Mishnah that by a craftsman, the possession that you have over something is not a chazakah. Aval shutuf yesh le chazakah. But Shmuel actually held when it comes to partners in a property, then there is a din of chazakah. If one goes and is machzik 3 years in the other part of the property of his partner, he could establish a chazakah. V'oz the Shmuel l'taimei, Shmuel follows his reasoning. The Da'ama Shmuel ashutvin machzikin zeh al zeh. Partners are able to establish a chazakah one on the other. Umeidin zeh al zeh. And one can testify on behalf of another. If there's somebody that's coming and arguing about the ownership of this property, so now a partner can come and testify on behalf of his partner. And there's no issue over here of being a negeh be'edus, that you're not impartial. You're coming and saying edus for your shutuf, he's your partner. The Gemara will later explain this, why he's not a negeh be'edus. And another halacha, v'nasim shemrei sachar zel lezeh. By shutfim that own something, let's say they own an object together, so here they have a halacha of a shemrei sachar with one another, meaning that the deal of the partnership is that when this object is in one person's possession, he's using it now. If it gets stolen from him, so then the other shutuf has a responsibility to reimburse him for the fact that it got stolen from him. That he's a shemrei sachar for this. If it gets stolen from his possession, that is, so because he had it now, so he has to reimburse it when it got stolen. And when the other shutuf has it, and it gets stolen from him, he would have to reimburse it when it gets stolen. Each one, that's part of the partnership. Each one takes that responsibility when he's using it. Okay, so now the Gemara focuses on the halacha of chazakah. Rami le Bava le Rav Yehuda b'ma'arte de bei Rab Zakkai. Baba asked Rav Yehuda, and they were in the cave. That's the girsa we have here in our Gemara. There's another girsa b'matzarta, by learning by Rav Zakkai. Mi yom Shmuel shutef yesh lechazakah. Is it true that Shmuel said that by partners there could be a din of chazakah where one partner is using the property of his partner and he's there for 3 years? He could establish a chazakah that he bought now the portion of the property from his partner. Is that true that Shmuel said this? But for Alma Shmuel said, Shutef ki yared b'reshus dami. When you're a partner and you're going into the portion of the field of your partner, so then it's like you went there with permission. What does it mean that it's like you went there with permission? Remember, don't you think that he was trying to say the Shutef ein lechazakah, that by partners there's no halacha of chazakah? Since there are partners in the same property, so when you go into your friend's portion of the property, so then since we're partners, so then you can't come and say that I'm here for 3 years and it's a proof that I bought it. No, since we're partners, so your partner lets you go there and he doesn't protest against you, and there's no proof at all that you bought it. So here we see Shmuel clearly said that by shutvim in a property, there's no chazakah. So the Gemara gives a few answers. Lo kashya, there's no contradiction here. Ha denachas l'kula. Here, it's talking about when this partner is now using the entire property all for himself. And ha denachas l'palga. And here, it's when he's only using half of the property for himself. Okay, so now the Gemara explains in what case will it be a chazakah, and in what case, by a partner, will it not be a chazakah. Now this answer here that the Gemara says, you can explain it either way. There's a svara to explain this either way. So one way to explain it, lahai gisa, one way to explain it is that when this person is being machzik in the entire property, that's a proof that he actually bought it. Because the nature of shutfin is that one uses one half and the other uses another half. If you're using the entire property for 3 years, so that's proof that you bought the whole property. The other partner should have been meicha. Why did he allow you to use it all? That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that let's say the property has 2 parts, and there's, let's say, one part of the property that's better quality. And you went and used that better quality of the property, just that part alone. That's a proof that you bought, that we split, and you bought that part of the property. Why? Because you could say that the nature of the shutfim is actually the opposite. That one uses it for a couple of years, then the other uses it for a couple of years, and they switch off planting and using this property. But the fact that one of them went ahead and used just one half of the property. He took the better property, quality of the property, and he's using that half for himself. That's proof that we split, and I bought this half of the property for myself. So then it will be a raya that he has a chazakah. Ravina Omar, another answer. Ravina says, in both cases where Shmuel says a shutef could establish a chazakah, when he says you can, the case is that one partner went and is using the entire property. V'loi kashin, there's no contradiction here. The isba din chaluka. Here we're talking about a property that is large enough that it could be divided. As we learned before in the Masechta, that you have to have a property that there's at least 4 amos for one and 4 amos for the other, and it's that. So then they divide. When you have shutfim that own this property, they divide it. So then, in such a case, if it's large enough that it could be divided, and one comes and is just using the entire property for himself for 3 years, that's proof that he bought it all. Because otherwise, since it's large enough to divide, but the nature of shutfim is that one uses one area and one uses another. And the less but in chalukah. And if it's a property that's too small, that's not divided between them, so then how do they divide it? One uses it for a year or maybe a couple of years, and the other uses it for a couple of years. So the fact that you're using it all for 3 years is not proof that you bought it. You're using it for 3 years, and then he's going to use it for 3 years. So therefore, by shutfin, you can't establish a chazakah. So Gemara Gufa, going back now to the statement itself that we quoted from what Shmuel said, Omar Shmuel shutef ki yored b'reshus dami, that by partners, if you're using the whole property, so it's like you came there with permission. So my kamashmal, what was the point that Shmuel was trying to say? So like the Gemara already said here, it's coming to say that shutfis, or the Bach says shutif, and lechazaki. It's coming to say that by shutfim there's no halacha of chazakah. When one is using the other part of the property in a way that it doesn't prove that he bought it, because this is the nature of shutfim, so therefore he can't establish a chazakah. But if that's what Shmuel's trying to say, so lame, shutuf ein lechazakah. Why didn't Shmuel use this lashon clearly that by shutfim there's no chazakah? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, Loimar, he's coming to say an additional halacha here, that here, this shutuf that went and used a portion of the property that he didn't have rights for, so then when he uses it, when then he went and used this property, and let's say this is a property that was made for planting trees, to be an orchard. And this shutuf went and used the whole property for himself, and he planted grain there. And the grain is growing, and it's tall enough that it reaches up to the shoulders, and now you want to take it all for yourself. So usually the halacha is, the Rashbam here brings there, we learned this in the Gemara and Bava Basra, when you go into someone's property and you plant there without permission, so then you don't get all of the produce that you planted there. You planted in someone else's property without permission. The halacha is yadei ala tachtaina. You don't get it all for yourself. Over here though, regarding partners, when you went and used the entire property even without permission, so because this is partners, you can't establish a chazakah, as the Gemara explained. That's what Shmuel is saying. But Shmuel also meant to say another halacha. Now, whatever you planted there, you can take it all for yourself. All the shvach that you got out of this property, you take for yourself. Obviously, then the other partner gets his portion when he plants a year later. But now, whatever you took, even though you went there without permission, since you're partners, you can take it all. This is the Rashbam's pshat in this expression of shvach hamagil lekesfayim. It means the wheat, the grain that grows when it's tall enough, it reaches to your shoulders. Taisus has another pshat. Shvach hamagil lekesfayim is actually saying a certain limitation. Rabbeinu Tam and Taisus says in the second wide line, he says that it means davar shabali de teirech. If it's the work that you yourself did in the property, what you worked yourself with your own shoulders, with your own arms, that's a shvach that you can take for yourself. But the work that you didn't do yourself, you won't be able to take for yourself if you went there, if you used it without permission.
So there's no chazakah for